Hey everybody, Ian from Hyperspace Hobbies here. Let's talk about KHORNE Daemons. Before we start our journey looking at all of the KHORNE Daemon data slates, let's look at the Daemon special rules that affect the entire army. The first one, and the most important one, is Shadow of Chaos. Shadow of Chaos has 3 different rules, and each part of the battlefield is affected by the Shadow of Chaos depending on a few certain conditions. Your deployment zone is always in your Shadow of Chaos. At the start of any phase, if you control at least half of the objectives in No Man's Land becomes part of your Shadow of Chaos. Then, at the start of any phase, if you control half of the objectives in your opponent's deployment zone, that area becomes under the influence of the Shadows of Chaos. Take note, however, that you can lose this in any phase the same way you can gain it in any phase. But what does Shadow of Chaos do? First rule you want to look at is Demonic Manifestation. Demonic Manifestation applies +1 to the battle shock tests of units in the Shadow of Chaos, and if they pass, they regen D3 lost wounds, which is great for your big characters, or D3 battle line units. In this case, because we're talking about KHORNE, that would be Bloodletters. Demonic Terror, however, does essentially the opposite effect to your opponent's units if they're in the Shadow of Chaos. -1 to their battle shock tests, and if the battle shock test is failed, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. Shadow of Chaos sort of changes the deep strike rules. Instead of having to be 9 inches horizontally from your opponent, you only need to be 6. But that's only if you're wholly within your Shadow of Chaos. It allows for some very reliable charges, especially when you add in a couple quirks that some KHORNE units have. So let's get into the KHORNE Index. I'm going to kind of break this down into units and then the characters that can join that units, and then finish it off with all the big beasts and vehicles that usually have an aura buff. So we're going to start it off with the bread and butter, Bloodletters. Bloodletters have a pretty solid close combat profile. 2 attacks with a 3 to hit, strength 5 with 2 damage. They also allow reroll of 1s or full rerolls. Bloodletters, however, have always been a bit of a glass cannon. Luckily, they come with 2 special items. The first one is a demonic icon. The second one is an instrument of chaos. The demonic icon gives models in the unit a leadership of 6, and the instrument of chaos adds 1 to those also valuable charge rolls. Bloodletters benefit from 2 different characters, the Bloodmaster and the Skulltaker. The Bloodmaster has a pretty good close combat profile, but his ability to buff the Bloodletters cannot be underlooked. The Bloodmaster's ability gives them +1 to wound, and with strength 5, -2 AP, and damage 2, this is a huge improvement. It also allows them to consolidate 6 inches with his Gory Path ability. This is massive. It'll get you on objectives, it'll tie up units that don't want to be in combat, and let's face it, that's what KHORNE is all about. The second character that you can add is the Skulltaker, and he is my personal favorite. I've played him in a couple of games, and his devastating wounds and precision close combat weapon really paid off big time. He has 1 extra attack over the Bloodmaster and grants all Bloodletters in the squad devastating wounds with his Lord of Decapitation ability, and Skulls for the Skull Throne means that his precision strikes that he's using against characters allow him to reroll hits and wounds. And also, if you kill a character, you get +1 CP. Skulls for the Skull Throne. The unit that I feel is probably one of the most powerful in the game is Blood Crushers. Blood Crushers have a very impressive profile, and it's been a huge buff from their last edition. Their special rules grant them all the attacks that a Bloodletters would have, as well as the Juggernaut's bladed horns. The Brass Stampede ability is very strong. For each model in the unit, remember, you'll probably be adding a character to this, making it a 7-man or a 4-man squad. You get to roll a D6, and on a 4-up, you do D3 mortal wounds. There's interesting wording on how this particular ability is applied. It actually is applied at the end of the charge step. So before you even get to the fight phase, The Blood Crushers are throwing out a lot of mortal wounds. Also have access to a demonic icon and an instrument of chaos, so they can get +1 to their charge rolls and a boost to their leadership. The Blood Crushers can only take one character, and that is a Skullmaster. A Skullmaster has a very similar profile to a Bloodmaster, except he's riding on a Juggernaut. And Skullmaster's Fury allows the whole unit to have devastating wounds for their Juggernaut's bladed horn attack. It also gives devastating charge. At the end of a charge, your opponent has to take a battle shock test. Devastating charge combos perfectly with Drought of Terror. Drought of Terror applies -1 AP to your attacks, and if your opponent's unit is battle shocked, you re-roll wounds against them. This means that Blood Crusher Squad and your Skullmaster are going to be throwing out some really impressive damage. Fleshhounds are the last unit that can potentially take a character, and they're pretty good too. They have a free heroic intervention with their Pouncing Hunter's ability. They have a Collar of Khorne, which gives them a 3-up Feel No Pain versus psychic abilities, and they have a fairly good close combat profile with 12-inch move. Fleshhounds can only have one character join their unit. Luckily, he's pretty awesome. That would be Karnak. Karnak has a very good profile, a little squishy, but he is a 3-headed dog. You can't ask too much. He's got the same Collar of Khorne for a 3-up Feel No Pain versus Psychic, and he has Prey of the Blood God, which is where you select any enemy unit, and your unit gets lethal hits versus that unit. Then once that unit has been killed, you can select a second unit. His Pack Leader ability allows the unit to reroll advance and charge rolls. This combos really well with the demonic stratagem Warp Surge. Warp Surge allows you to advance and charge if you're within your Shadow of Chaos. This makes those Fleshhounds and Karnak a literal missile. Well, that's it for characters that can join units, but what about the other Khorne units that exist? What about the Skull Cannon? The Skull Cannon has a pretty impressive shooting profile as far as Khorne goes, and the big benefit is Skulls of the Fallen. After a unit is hit, it has to take a battle shock test. Now, if it is failed, again, you can hit it with that stratagem, Drought of Terror, and hopefully get some rerolls in the close combat phase. A Ren Master on a Blood Throne is a fantastic addition to the army, and his abilities are pretty strong. The Ren Master on a Blood Throne has pretty solid stat line for his points. He has a lot of attacks from various sources, and his Blood Throne ability allows him to select an enemy unit at the start of the fight phase, and all Khorne units that are attacking that unit get +1 strength, an additional AP, and +1 damage. This is insane on Bloodletters, especially if those Bloodletters have a Bloodmaster or the Skull Taker in them. It's a huge uptick in damage. And he also has a special ability, Champion Slayer. Champion Slayer allows him to reroll wounds versus characters and monsters, and when he kills a monster, he regenerates D6 wounds. This unit not only has really good profile when attacking monsters or characters, but his buff to additional Khorne units is unbelievable. Both Demon Princes are fantastic in their own right, and they both get the same bonus for devoting to the Khorne god. Their bonus is +2 to their close combat strengths. Prince of Darkness ability from the Demon Prince of Khorne is fantastic. 6 inches of stealth for your Khorne army is going to really up your defense. And Unholy Vigor allows him to get a 3-up invulnerable save once per game, and it lasts till the end of the phase. This means if he is targeted, they'd have to shoot a 3-up invulnerable -1 to be hit unit. He's very tanky. The Demon Prince of Khorne with wings, however, is all about the offense. Malefic Destruction grants him a once per game +3 to his attacks for the end of the fight phase, which is fantastic because he's got a lot of attacks and they're very high strength. And Harbinger of Death means he grants at the start of the fight phase either lethal hits, precision hits, or sustained hits 1. This makes him very much a missile and cannot be left alone on the battlefield to touch your opponents. The Bloodthirster is awesome. Bloodthirster has a fantastic stat line. If you combo this with a cheeky rapid ingress, he can for sure get anywhere on the battlefield to make that charge, and his toughness and durability means he's going to tank shots to get to where he needs to. but ideally you'll be deep striking him within your Shadow of Chaos and he would get a 6-inch charge anyways. He has a couple of different weapon choices and they're all really great depending on what you think you want to use him for. His abilities are also really strong. His first ability grants him a 6-inch aura of +1 to hit in melee. This also applies to himself. So if something gives him -1 to hit in close combat, he'll still be hitting on 2. Relentless Charge means that at the end of the fight phase, you roll 8d6, and for every 4-up, he deals a mortal wound. Skarbrand, on the other hand, is even crazier in close combat. Though what he lacks in movement, he makes up for in +2 wounds, a fairly good shooting attack with Bellows of Endless Fury, and an amazing close combat profile. I would almost be sure it's some of the best in the game. And his 2 special rules are truly what KHORNE is all about. The first one, Rage Embodied. Rage Embodied gives Skarbrand a 6-inch aura of +1 to attack for KHORNE units. This excludes monsters and vehicles. So he really does benefit getting hoarded around by Fleshhounds and Bloodletters, as they're probably the most numerous thing you're going to have on the battlefield. And his last one is something he's been known for many editions, Murderlust. Murderlust gives him a 6-inch aura, and if you're within that aura, you have to pass a leadership test if you want to fall back, or you remain stationary and you're stuck in combat. This means that Skarbrand is going to be stuck in just where he wants to. Chaos Demons have some of the most fun stratagems in the game, and one of my personal favorites is the Realm of Chaos. At the end of an opponent's turn, you can pick up 1 unit, or you can pick up 2 units as long as they're within your Shadow of Chaos, and you can deep strike them on your next turn. This allows you to rapidly maneuver your KHORNE Daemons across the battlefield, and it makes them incredibly strong if you need to lash out and strike your opponent's soft spots. A KHORNE Soul Grinder hits so incredibly hard. A Soul Grinder has a fantastic stat line, and if you're going to push big bad monsters, you pretty much have to include a Soul Grinder or 2. It can move over 4-inch terrain and all other monsters and vehicle units with its Scuttling Walker ability. Because it's KHORNE, it has the Torrent of Burning Blood, which is a 2d6, strength 5, -1, damage 1, ignores cover torrent, which is going to do a lot of damage. It's got a pretty good shooting profile for the rest of its guns. It's one of the only units in this codex I would use the Tank Shock stratagem on, because you take the strength of one of its close combat attacks, roll that many d6s, and for every 5+, you do a mortal wound to your opponent to a maximum of 6. And if the strength of the attack is higher than your opponent's toughness, which it almost always will because the strength of his attacks are so strong, you roll an additional 2 dice. So he has a great chance of doing some mortal wounds at the start of the fight phase. Thank you everybody for joining me and dissecting all the KHORNE Daemons that they have to offer in the new Demon Index. And I'd like to say a quick shout out to a couple other YouTube channels that you can check out for quality content. This is Ian from Hyperspace Hobbies. See you next time.